Hey guys, welcome to today's show. It's great to have all of you here. I know we're live slightly later than usual, but thank you so much for tuning in. Hope you got the message. Really excited to speak with you. We've had a absolutely phenomenal week of guests. If you joined us on Monday, we were joined by Matthew Ricard, who was talking about a plea for animals, happiness, altruism. Check that out if you missed that one. On Tuesday, we had Deepak Chopra here to talk about radical beauty and spiritual beauty. Yesterday, you were stuck with me alone. I was talking to you about being in flow. And today, I've got a really exciting guest that I can't wait to introduce you to. He's the best-selling author of Trust Me, I'm Lying, The Obstacle is the Way, and Ego is the Enemy. His name is Ryan Holiday. So I'd like to welcome Ryan to the show. Ryan.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for being here. It's great to see you here.
Of course.
Yeah, awesome.
Excited.
And today he's here to talk to us about his new book, The Daily Stoic. Maybe you've seen this, and maybe I know a lot of you tweeted me about this one when you saw he was coming on the show. Ego is the Enemy. Now, I'm just absolutely blown away because Ryan has pulled off releasing 2 books this year. He just told me. This one came out in June. This one's coming out on Tuesday. We will put the comments section to order either of these, so you'll see it there. If you want to order it from Amazon, it's in the comments section right now. Please click and order if you want to order these books right now. But Ryan, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Today we're talking about both your books. We're going to talk about you as a person, everything that you've been up to. And I really wanted to start off with this. Just introduce yourself to the viewers. For those, I know there's lots of people who are really excited to have you here. And many people may have never seen you before, so.
Sure. Yeah, introducing myself is always the weirdest thing. I don't know where to start, but I guess I'm a writer. I write about ancient philosophy, but not the philosophy that people think. This is practical philosophy. It's philosophy that helps you live a better life, which is actually sort of historically the role that philosophy was supposed to play and historically has played for a lot of people. So that's what I write about. My day job is I'm a marketer. I was the director of marketing at American Apparel. I've written a couple of books about marketing for business, for startups, stuff like that. So, but what I really care about is the stuff that I put in these books.
Absolutely amazing. And I love that switch from marketer to undercover philosopher. Did your philosophy ever come out in your marketing?
Yeah, I mean, I was introduced to Stoicism, which is what I wrote about mostly when before I got into marketing. I was in college and someone told me I had to read this book, and I had this habit. I would go around as a kid and I would just ask anyone, I would be like, what's a book that I have to read? Like, what's a book that would change my life? And the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius was the first one that I got in terms of Stoicism, and it sort of shook my whole world. And so again, Stoicism is not, when you study Stoic philosophy, you don't become some turtleneck college professor, right? It's just something you use. It's like a tool in your toolkit. People have called it an operating system. So I'm using it in my life as I'm working my way up in the corporate world. So I never even really saw it as a transition. It's just sort of 2 things.
Yeah, awesome. And for those who don't know what Stoicism is, can you explain that to the viewers?
Yeah, so it's an ancient philosophy. Some people are vaguely familiar with one of the practitioners, Marcus Aurelius. He's the old guy in Gladiator that Joaquin Phoenix's character kills. But basically, Stoicism was an ancient philosophy popular with the Greeks and Romans. As I define it, I say the Stoics hold that we don't control what happens to us, we control how we respond. Mm-hmm. So it's, Epictetus, one of the Stoics, he says, our first chief task in life is to make the distinction between what we control and what we don't control. And so that idea, that's what Stoicism is about. Okay, how do I get better at the things I control? What should I be doing with the things that I control? That's what the philosophy is about.
Absolutely amazing. I think that applies to absolutely everyone in the world, right? It's like just getting that clarity over I control this, I don't control this.
Well, and that's the reason why it's resonated for 2,000 plus years, is that it's so simple, it's so timeless, and it's true, right? A lot of philosophical ideas can sort of ebb and flow based on trends, but the reality is we all wake up, we're in a world that we don't control, and we're trying to get the most out of ourselves and the most out of the surroundings that we have, and that's where the philosophy comes in.
Absolutely amazing. Now, Thea's asking a question. She says, your name sounds familiar. Did you contribute to university books?
A couple of my books actually are taught in schools. My first book was a sort of an expose of the media system, and it's taught in a lot of classes, but my name also sounds funny, so that might have something to do with it.
You said that philosophy has always been used as a practical tool in society for living. When did philosophy start becoming practical for you? Like, when did you start seeing its practical use?
So it's funny, I was introduced to Stoic philosophy, and I'd say maybe 6-7 months later, I dropped out of college to work for the first author that I worked for. I had a job in Hollywood. It was one of the most difficult periods in my life up to that point, right? Like my parents hated the decision. A lot of people thought it was a mistake. It was scary. I'm on my own for the first time. And so these are the kinds of moments that philosophy is designed for, right? I don't control my parents' reaction. I don't control, this happening or that happening. All I control is my own behavior. I control what am I going to do with this moment. Is this going to be a turning point that makes my life better? Or is this going to be something that overwhelms me? I become scared. I become afraid. I shut down. Is this going to be a moment where I'm sort of repulsed and I have to go back and, start over again? So it's in these moments when we're tested, when we're under extreme stress, that's where philosophy does the best job for us. It's not in the easy times that we need philosophy, but in the harder ones.
Awesome. Okay, that definitely makes sense. And is there any particular advice you can give for particular hard times you see? What are the most common hard times that you see philosophers helping people grapple with? Any struggles that kind of stand out?
Yeah, I mean, historically, Stoicism has found resonance with like people who are imprisoned in one form or another, right? James Stockdale, he's shot down over Vietnam. He's heading into a prisoner of war camp. He says to himself, "I'm leaving the world of technology. I'm entering the world of Epictetus." And what he means is like he's going to be literally deprived of his physical freedom. So what does he do? He says, "I'm going to focus on I'm going to focus on what I do control, which is my own thoughts, my own feelings, the story that I tell myself." So I think what's interesting when you look at Stoicism, it's working in these very extreme situations. It probably then is going to work when you're arguing with your parents over whether you should stay in school or not, or whether your boss is a jerk to you, or you're stuck in traffic. So I like to look at these extreme stories because they help us with thankfully the softer parts of modern life.
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. If something's helping you deal with the extremities of life, then
Yes.
if you can remember it when life's not as extreme. But that's why sometimes we look at it and people say, oh, well, I can't relate to that.
Sure.
But actually your point is that the principles, the mindsets, the stories actually are very relatable and can be applied.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, look, if these things are working for Marcus Aurelius, who at the time was the emperor of Rome, the most powerful man in the world, right? And actually one of the Stoic philosophers that was his favorite was a guy named Epictetus, who was a slave. He was a former slave. So the idea that it's working for extreme success and wealth on the one hand, and then extreme poverty and difficulty on the other hand, to me that's showing that it's fully rounded. It gives you everything else is somewhere in between being the president and being at the absolute bottom of society.
Yeah, definitely. Awesome. Guys, keep your questions coming. I'm seeing lots coming through now. So we have a question from Kevin. Ryan, what inspired you to begin writing? And after 3 to 4 books, what continues to inspire you to write today?
Writing is this amazing job because you have to take what's inside your head and make it real. You have to put it out on the page. And it's perpetually exciting because it's both exciting and discouraging in the sense that it's never as good on the page as it is in your head. So that's the challenge that keeps you going. I think I've loved books. That's what I spend all my time doing and thinking about. So it was this idea. I was a research assistant for an author when I was in college, and I sort of learned how it worked. And then at some point you go, I think I can do this, right? Yeah. There are these things in life that are so incomprehensible to us. And then as you start to become exposed to them, you realize it's a process like anything else. And so my first book was, having an idea and then applying that process to making it real.
Amazing. Kevin, thanks for your question. I've got another question here from Saki. She says, how do you apply philosophy when you're caught up in the moment or if someone is in denial?
Yeah, well, the Stoics talk a lot about not being caught up in that moment. Viktor Frankl, who was a survivor of the Holocaust, he was a big fan of the Stoics, he's saying, between stimulus and response, there is a moment. And that in that moment, in that pause, that's where we choose who we're going to be and what we're going to do. And so I think so many of us are reactive all the time. This happens, so we do this. This happens, we do this. Someone says something to you, so now you're upset. Something amazing happens to you, so now you're ecstatic, right? And so we're jerked around by our emotions. And the Stoics talk a lot about sort of putting that pause in, just stopping and thinking about, okay, why did this happen? What does it mean? How can I make sure that I'm not going too far in any of keeping that even keel, I think, is really important.
Definitely.
The denial, that's a much harder thing. You got to, I think fighting other people's denial is probably not your concern. It's what are you in denial about? What are you afraid to admit? But it's a process, man.
Yeah, amazing. And what is it that allows us to become positive about raising that awareness? A lot of people say, oh my God, we're overanalyzing. Like, I'm having to overanalyze everything I do now.
Sure.
And I'm feeling like that's annoying or frustrating. How do you see it as a positive thing?
Well, the Stoics talk about objectivity. It's seeing things as they are. Like, they'll say, this happened, that's objective. This happened and it means blank. That's not objective. That's subjective. So when you're telling yourself, hey, I've been harmed by this, then you feel harmed by it. When you tell yourself that this is unfair, it feels unfair. So one of the things they look at is making sure you're telling yourself the right story about what's happening, or ideally, no story. Because what I always try to think about is this thing that happened to me that I think is bad, someone else would probably trade for, right? And vice versa. Something that they think is good, I might think is bad. So the Stoics are saying, look, there really is no such thing as good or bad. Not morality. There's no good situation or bad situations. There are just situations.
Yeah.
Even Shakespeare says, nothing either good nor bad, but thinking makes it so. So if you realize that you have the power to determine what something means in your life, that's very empowering, and it's very defensive in the sense that it prevents you from feeling like something bad has happened to you. You're protected because you realize this is just an objective event, and now I'm going to focus on how I respond.
Amazing. I absolutely love it. It's the most empowering thing ever,
Totally.
right?
It's the ultimate power if you think about it, right?
Yeah.
So one superpower would be I can control everyone around me. Well, we know that can't happen, right? But what if I can't control other people, but I can control what categories I put all these things in, or what they mean, or how I feel about them? Then that's kind of the ultimate trump card.
Are there any aspects of Stoicism that you don't recommend?
Yeah. Well, look, this is an ancient philosophy written in a time where there were emperors who were believed to be gods, there were slaves, there were obviously a number of social practices that we would not want to recreate today. So putting all of those aside, because I don't think there's much debate of that, the Stoics talked a lot about predestination. They sort of believed that everything was fated. Now, that can be very discouraging to people, and I'm not sure I believe in predetermination, but the analogy that Marcus Aurelius used that I like, he says, we are like a dog tied to a moving cart, right? So we're being dragged somewhere, and we can choose, are we going to dig in our heels and sort of be dragged unwillingly, or are we going to go willingly? And then I think you focus on, in that analogy, how long is the rope? Do we have space to explore? Can we look at other things? Can we run faster than the cart? Can we lag behind the cart? So I think that the idea of predetermination to me is one where I try to find some flexibility. I try to maybe bend the translations a little bit. I don't love the idea that I am completely powerless over myself and the universe. But you got to remember, look, these were people who are doing the best they could to explain the universe before our real understanding of biology, before our understanding of evolution, before our understanding of neurobiology or psychology. So you want to take the stuff that's true, that works, and look, they're dead, so they're not going to argue with you if you reject some of the things that you find have been disproven. So.
Yeah. And see, I'm a big fan. I love reading philosophy. I love what you're speaking about. Now, looking at it from the other side, you said they're dead. You said that it was before we had neurology and neuroscience and psychology. Yeah. What stops it from becoming irrelevant?
Well, one, I think,
I'm on your side.
I think that they're going to the timeless truths about human nature. And it actually is interesting how often psychological studies will confirm what these dead old white guys were basically just guessing about 2,000 plus years ago. So I think that's really interesting. Like cognitive behavioral therapy, which is invented in the 20th century, is rooted in Stoic philosophy. So there is a lot there. I don't think it's irrelevant because it's talking about the fundamental facts of who we are, what meaning is, how we manage ourselves, how we find purpose and satisfaction, and how we deal with the fact that suffering and difficulty and adversity are a part of life as well.
Capri says, paraphrase quote from Ryan, between the stimulus and the response there is a pause, and in that pause is who we are. Beautifully said loving
Well,
this.
it was said by a much smarter person than me, Viktor Frankl. But yeah, I mean, look, he's someone, he's stuck in a concentration camp, and he's able to even find meaning in that experience, which I think shows, again, we were talking about extreme stories. If he's able to, he was in Auschwitz, and 2 other concentration camps. If he's able to leave that experience, he lost his entire family. If he's able to leave that experience and find some meaning and purpose in that, I think it shows you that you can find meaning when your laptop eats something that you're working on, or you have a bad day.
So Morris says, hi Jay and Ryan. How can we all apply philosophy at every step of our life without being too philosophical?
Well, I think that idea of being philosophical to most people means you're being abstract or academic. I don't think that's what this philosophy is. This is very practical. Look, that one of my favorite meditations from Marcus Aurelius, this is in book 5 of Meditations. It's a conversation that he has with himself. He says, like, at dawn when you awake and you have trouble getting out of bed, you have to remind yourself. And he goes through this exercise. And to think that 2,000 years ago, the emperor of Rome was having an inner dialogue about how he wanted to stay under the covers and keep warm, but he knew he had to go to work and do his job because people were counting on him. To me, that's not philosophical. That's so practical and real. It's like I had that same discussion with myself this morning. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
and so,
definitely.
so this is, to me, there is no distinction between philosophy and practicality. That's an academic distinction that we can put aside.
Do you consider anyone today to be like the new philosophers, the new Stoics, the new leaders of thought in this space, in an authentic and genuine way? I'm talking about in the way that we would regard Marcus Aurelius, Aristotle, etc.
Well, it is interesting. 2 of the most famous philosophers of all time, you take Cato, the younger, who's a Stoic philosopher. He never wrote anything down. He was just considered a philosopher because of how he lived, right? Or Socrates, most famously, he never wrote anything down. We just have dialogues that other people recorded him having. So I don't necessarily think a philosopher has to be someone who's written something down, a book that you like. If you find someone who you think is leading a life that you admire, not because they're rich or successful or famous, but living a life of meaning and purpose, and they're doing good things, to me that's philosophy. So I think we should take it very specific. Who are the people in your life who are leading you philosophically? To me, that's where I would focus that question.
Yeah, I really feel, let me know what you think about this. I really feel currently that there's a big shift in that redefining of success or happiness or meaning or purpose that you've just mentioned now.
Yeah.
Like before, previously, maybe people would have said, oh, well, look at the top 5 rich list and think about how they live, and those are their habits for success. But you're actually saying something very different.
Well, sure. Look, even Arianna Huffington, the founder of the Huffington Post, she's like, we need a third metric for how we measure what we're doing. It's not just money and success. And what the Stoics talk about over and over again about those first 2 metrics is, look, you don't get to take them with you when you die. You're dead. Right? Marcus says, look, he's someone who knew by being the emperor that people were going to remember him after his death. And he's constantly reminding himself, hey, you're not going to be around to enjoy that. You're going to be dead. What does it matter to you that people 200 years from now are saying your name? And so I think we want to remember that these things that we chase, that we think are important, are really relatively meaningless in that big picture. And so, yeah, I do think you have to ask yourself, was this a good life? Is this the best that I was capable of? Did I enjoy it? Did I help other people? These are the kind of metrics I think we want to think about.
Absolutely brilliant. So I'm going to actually give you guys a sneak peek. So I was reading through this book. I'm absolutely enjoying it. I love the fact that it's a meditation for each day, which is absolutely brilliant because it's not something that you have to read all in one go. You can read in the morning. You can read it before you go to bed. It's brilliantly put together, and it's really short. So if you're like someone who says, I don't have time, that's all you've got to read, right? It's just, and it's brilliant because you can learn a lot just from that one page. So I picked out a few that I really liked that I wanted to dive into with you further. So I've got the pages marked here. So this was one on the first page, just because I thought it was something everyone can relate to, which is all on control and choice. Now here you say the single most important practice in Stoic philosophy is differentiating between what we can change and what we can't.
Sure.
Tell us how we know what we can change and what we can't.
Well, in the short of it is you only control yourself. You don't control other people's opinions. You don't control what other people do. You don't control the weather. You don't control world events. You control yourself. And in some cases, given that a disease could strike you down right now, or you could have some,
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks.
Something could happen. Like, you don't even necessarily control your body, right? Like, I'm feeling a little sick right now. I can't do anything about that, but I control my thoughts, right? Ultimately, that's at the most basic level. Our thoughts are the singular thing that we control. And look, there's a reason that they focus on the serenity prayer in 12-step groups. It's like people whose lives have spun massively out of control, they're in a downward spiral. The first step to getting things back on track is figuring out the difference between what you control and what you don't control, and as they say, having the courage and the wisdom to know the difference.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things we get caught up in this principle is we often think that, okay, so I can't control how someone responds to me.
Right.
But actually, if I change, then I'll get a different response.
Yes.
So in effect, you still are looking at your change in behavior as a hope for a change in someone else.
Right.
And that still gets you in trouble.
Instead of focusing on what you are doing and having your own metrics or your own intrinsic reasons for doing what you're doing. It's like, look, obviously with marketing, for instance, I can try to control how my books sell. And I could burn myself out hustling and trying to market everywhere. But ultimately, I have to be happy with what I put on the page. I have to be happy, even before that, I have to be happy with the creative act. It has to be, because look, I could die before this comes out on Tuesday.
Yeah,
so I have to be happy now with what I've made. And if you can be happy in that moment and not needing other things to happen, then everything that happens to you is a gift in that way.
Trey, how has practicing Stoicism affected your relationship with your spouse or partner? Or
Yeah. So I am married. My wife and I have always loved Stoicism together. It's something we've both studied and talked a lot about. I think what it does is you realize, and I'm not saying I'm perfect at it, I think in the Acknowledgements, my first book, I said, thank you for sticking with me through my unstoic moments. But you realize that, hey, if I want to improve this relationship, I should improve myself. You don't project your feelings onto other people. Something my wife says to me, let's say we're arguing, and I'll be like, you're being very frustrating, right? And she's like, someone can't frustrate you, right? Like, only you, that's what you are bringing. So again, this distinction between what you control and what you don't control is just it just reduces the pressure on everything, because then you're not hoping that people do this or that, or that everything goes your way. You're just focused on yourself. And that ironically or paradoxically makes it easier and better to be in a relationship.
Absolutely. It's so strange you brought that one up, because one of the pages I had marked was impossible without your consent.
Yes.
Where you're talking about, nothing can happen without you allowing it to happen.
Yeah,
right? That
right.
frustration.
Totally, yeah. When you're saying my work is overwhelming to me, that's a choice in a way. You can step back. Like, the work is not real. It's not a person, right? So it's not doing anything to you. You're sort of projecting this intent onto things and then feeling persecuted or, picked on. When really it's again, the events outside you are objective. What you tell yourself about it is really important then. So if you tell yourself, this is unfair, this is impossible, in a way that becomes true.
Absolutely true, guys. We're guided by the stories we tell ourselves. And actually, in regards to that, you've actually said that it's better not to have a story.
Yeah.
How does that process work of rewiring our story?
Yeah, I think when you're existing in the present moment, the past is irrelevant and the future is, you're indifferent to that future. And so I think what happens is oftentimes we tell ourselves this narrative about where we've come from and about where we're going. And that makes us very, very dependent or vulnerable to chance or fate, as the Stoics would call it. When that means that if it doesn't work out your way, you're disappointed or you're upset or you feel deprived in some way. So I think it's remembering, hey, you're not living in a movie. Your life is not a novel. This is not a reality television show. This is just a series of, in some ways, life is a series of unrelated events. The only constant is you. And so you want to make sure that you're not putting so much on to these insignificant events that it makes it hard for you to enjoy them.
Brilliant. And I'm going to pick out another one. I just want people to see how practical the book is and how it goes into. So this is 7th of January. So if you're reading this on January 7th, but you can start it on another day, of course. And page 15. So you're saying that let's break down each one of those tasks of the mind.
Yeah.
So you talk about the different functions of the mind.
Yeah.
So can you share a bit more?
Yeah. So here, let me pull this. So he's saying that the tasks of the mind are choice, refusal, yearning, repulsion, preparation, purpose, and assent. And what he means by that is, you choose what to do and how you think. You refuse temptations, the things that you don't want to do. Yearning, what are you hoping for? What are you trying to get better at? Repulsion, what are you pushing away from yourself, right? And purpose, right? What guiding principle? The Stoics are also big on preparation, right? They want to, I think we're so big today on positive visualization. The Stoics are actually big on negative visualization. What's the worst thing that can happen, and can I be prepared for that? Can I accept that in advance? So then if it doesn't happen, I'm pleasantly surprised rather than shocked and caught off guard.
Let's dive into that a bit more,
right.
actually. Yeah, that's super interesting.
Sure.
So this negative visualization spin. So how does... I find that a lot of people who have negative visualizations today, often struggle a lot, as in they're not necessarily doing it in the way the Stoics are talking about.
Well, it's not an excuse to not take action. It's like, maybe an example that guys might understand. It's like, okay, let's say you wanted to approach a woman to ask her out. If you that can be intimidating. But if you tell yourself, okay, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? She's not going to murder you, right? It's like the worst thing that's going to happen is they're going to say no, right? Or, applying for some job that you don't think you can get. What's the worst that's going to happen? You don't get the job you already don't have, right? So if you can tell yourself what this worst case scenario is and you're okay with it, it allows you to push forward and then sort of tamper down some of that intimidation. And then also it's like, hey, look, when you get on a plane, it could crash. Thinking and being aware and maybe doing a quick mental, walkthrough of what that would do, right, doesn't make it any more or less likely that it's going to crash. It just makes it so you're not shocked or appalled or caught off guard when that does happen. In business they call it the pre-mortem, right? Now, don't wait until after it's happened to find out why. Think in advance what could happen, and then hopefully take steps to prevent that from happening.
Right, so that the more light you shine on knowing about the unknown,
yes, you're
actually more likely to be better prepared for what could happen.
Right, it's like if you live in a world where no one gets cancer, nothing bad ever happens, you're not going to take advantage of you're not going to tell that person you love them before you say goodbye. You're going to not be present when you're spending time with them because you don't think it's important. You're not going to save or prepare for a rainy day. So it's not pessimistic, it's just realistic. And then you have to also have the courage to proceed in spite of the fact that there's a chance that it might not go your way.
Absolutely brilliant, guys. I hope you're enjoying the answers from Ryan as much as I am. And I'm going to dive him into what we call the on-the-spot round here. But he didn't know about this. I never prep the guests that we have. But this on-the-spot round is just quick-fire questions. Okay. We get you on your toes. I think you're going to be absolutely brilliant and you're going to find this easy.
I've prepared mentally in advance for quick-fire questions.
Did you actually?
No.
So, Ryan, here we go. If Aristotle was alive today, what would he say?
What would he say?
Yeah.
I think he'd probably be generally disappointed, right? The idea that this man thousands of years ago was so intellectually curious and he explored all these things, and then to watch, how we waste so much of our time doing things that don't matter. I would bet that would be partly his reaction.
Okay, brilliant. What's your favorite app and why?
I like Instapaper because I can read articles without the distraction of ads or all this noise and a million other things going on. So I like to stop and think and read in quiet. Brilliant.
Hope you guys download Instapaper. I don't know if many of you knew about it. The third question, would you rather have no internet or no phone?
Definitely, I'd rather have no phone. The internet doesn't interrupt you the way that a phone call does. Nice. Okay, very good.
What is the book you've reread the most?
It would be one of the Stoics, probably Meditations of Marcus Aurelius.
Brilliant. Celeb with the biggest ego. We're going to dive in to talk about ego as the enemy. So celeb with the biggest ego.
Right now, you probably have to go with Kanye West in terms of living people with enormous egos. And we see how it helps him in some ways and clearly holds him back in others.
Definitely. So let's dive into your book in a moment after that. The most humble celebrity.
Probably someone that we wouldn't even think of because they're not chasing the spotlight in that way.
Yeah. Anyone you can think of?
No.
No, it's hard. Would you rather have drinks with Hillary or Trump?
As a human being connecting with another human being, obviously Hillary. To watch an absurd egomaniac act like a fool, obviously Trump.
Okay, awesome. Advice for your 20-year-old self?
I've been asked this one before. I always say relax. I was so intense and tied up and convinced that everything I was doing was like a life or death situation, and the reality is I don't even remember most of those things that I was stressed about. So I would just say to relax and take it, piece by piece.
Okay, awesome. Advice that you received that took time to sink in?
Yeah, when I wanted to be a writer I admired, he told me, he's like, writers live interesting lives. And I didn't understand totally what he meant, but what he meant is that you have to go do things, and the experiences that you have in life ultimately fuel your writing. But that's very hard when you're 20 years old and you want to be a writer and you don't have anything to say. You're like, but I want to write now.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, brilliant. Absolutely great. Now, fast forward to 80, 90 years old.
Okay.
What would be your biggest regret of things you didn't do?
I'm not big for regrets. I sort of do the things that I want to do when I want to do them.
Nice.
I suspect that I'll probably have the pretty common regret of maybe having worked too much. I think that's obviously the one most people say on their deathbed. But I mean, the good news is there's a lot of time to change that before it happens.
Definitely. Awesome. On a Friday night, you can find me
probably at dinner with my wife.
Nice. Sometimes you wish you could, something you wish you could learn in an instance.
I wish I could learn other languages. I don't really speak any other languages,
Yeah.
and I admire people who are able to think from different cultures and perspectives and lexicons that way.
Nice. What's something the world needs right now?
It needs Trump to go away.
Nicely said, very open. That's been the consistent message across all our guests. So I think it was Gabby Bernstein when she was here. She even did a prayer for Trump live just for him to go away. The best way to de-stress for you that you like?
Unplugging, nature, animals, or books.
Oh, nice. And I am happiest when?
When I'm at my house, outside, with animals, or reading.
Let's dive into Ego is the Enemy. What made you write this? And who should read this? Why should anyone?
I mean, I think anyone who has ambitions, who's trying to do something. I mean, there is an inherent amount of ego in trying to make a dent in the universe, right?
Yes.
And in that way, ego can propel you forward, but it can also destroy the very thing that you're trying to build and do. So to me, it's about the destructive effects of ego. And actually, when you study the most successful people in history, they didn't have huge egos. And when they did, it was that ego that led to their biggest difficulties or problems.
That makes a lot of sense. So, and I love what you've just said. Anyone who's trying to make a dent, anyone who's trying to have an influence, even anyone who's trying to have a positive difference in the world,
totally,
there's ego involved. And
yes.
You're saying that ego has been the root of their demise, or it's had been something that they've had to deal with.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, look, Kanye West isn't a great rapper because he has a huge ego. He's a great rapper because he's done the work and he's a brilliant musician. It's when he can't not get up on stage and interrupt someone that he turns people off, that he causes endless amounts of problems for him, which, by the way, prevent him from doing other things that he wants to do. So I think we want to say, just because someone has an ego doesn't mean they won't be successful, but it does determine how successful they'll ultimately be.
Nice. So let's say, all the viewers, we're always trying to build a community of change makers. Everyone out there is making local, I hope you're okay, making local or global change in one way or the other. Let's say that they start seeing some traction. They start getting some positivity. Maybe like when you started writing your books and they became bestsellers.
Yeah.
And then you start feeling slightly proud. You get that ego kicking in.
Sure.
How do you deal with that?
It's in those moments that you have to say that feeling is a distraction from the work that I need to do, and you need to focus on doing that work. The attention, this takes you away. It takes you out of the moment. It takes you away from the purpose of what you're doing. If you're doing this thing because you want to be recognized, that will ultimately always come up empty for you. It will ultimately always be unfulfilling. It's really hard. Like writing a book, for instance, is very, very hard. If the only thing that's keeping you going is the thought of what other people are going to say at the end, that's not going to get you through. But let's say it does. And what if they don't appreciate it when it comes out? Does that mean the entire experience was worthless? Of course not, right? So you have to be intrinsically motivated by the thing you are trying to accomplish. You have to have purpose more than a love of applause.
Absolutely brilliant, guys. I love that advice. I think it's so practical to every single one of us trying to make a difference. So someone's saying ego is the greatest educator. Do you think we all have to fall into traps of our ego sometimes to learn that, or can we avoid it?
Well, there's a quote I have in the book from Bismarck, and he's saying, any fool can learn by experience. I prefer to learn from the experience of others. So yes, of course, we all learn painful lessons from our ego when we overreach, when we think we're better than we are, and where you get that rude awakening. But ideally, you want to avoid that as much as possible, and you want to learn by studying and talking to smart people and avoiding painful experiences.
And what sparked that? Were you looking at the lives of certain people, and what kind of sparked you to write about ego specifically?
And so I was the director of marketing at American Apparel, and when you watch this massive company get destroyed, it changes. You realize, hey, sometimes the feelings that make you successful, the drive, the personality, it can also be your worst enemy. And so I wanted to look at people who were able to get past that.
And which people stand out to you as good examples that got past it?
Someone like George Marshall is a hero of mine. He's also in David Brooks's book, The Road to Character. But the idea that he had the chance to command the troops in the invasion of Normandy, and he chooses not to do it because someone else was more qualified for the job. He didn't want personal considerations. So he passed up an opportunity of a lifetime to do this. He turns down $1 million to not write his memoirs because he doesn't want to have to gossip about other people. To me, that's amazing.
That is phenomenal. Yeah, that's absolutely incredible. Right, and we need to see more signs of people doing that, I guess. And do you see that growing? Yeah,
I would say no. I think social media makes it so easy to make everyone feel like a celebrity. We're always performing. We always want to look like a badass on the internet. We don't want to be humble and real and raw, and we don't want to focus on, we want credit for everything that we're doing. And I think that takes people out of or away from the work and towards sort of egotistical aims.
And how does Ryan Holiday manage his ego and
I mean, it's a process, man. Look, like when I look at my, my bio is on the back of this book, I have to remember, hey, that's that's a fraction of my life, It's more complicated than that. The bestseller status, I can't let that go to my head. I have to focus on the next book, on the next project. The success you've had in the past has no bearing or impact on whether you'll be successful in the future, only the work you continue to do. And if you lose your ability to connect with other people, to share and know what matters and what's important to them, you can't do your job.
You're making philosophy so relevant to everyone's day's life, and you're living it. Well, look, it's there in your life.
These philosophers, they did the amazing work, right? They did this. And I think it's important, and this goes back to the learning from experience thing. There are literally thousands of years of wisdom out there from some of the smartest people who ever lived, the most successful people who ever lived, people who dealt with whatever you're dealing with times 1,000. So if you don't avail yourself of that wisdom, what are you doing? Yeah. You know what I mean? That's why leaders read. The most successful coaches, athletes, generals. The president reads, right? And he reads because he wants to get better and he wants to learn, and there's people he can do that from.
Do you have any tips for reading for our viewers? Like what can make, so some people say I find reading boring, or some people find reading slower. Some people just get stuck at, oh my God, there's so many books to read.
Sure.
Right? So what are your tips for readers?
I say a couple. One, take a book with you everywhere. When you're bored, reading suddenly becomes less boring. Make it a priority. See it as part of your job, right? It's hard. It's like you can be at the office, talking on GChat, and people will think you're working. But if you kick your feet up and you read a book, people think you're messing around.
Yeah.
So I think it's important that you see reading as part of your job. Read things that you're passionate about. Don't read the books that other people say you have to read. Read the books that you want to read. Do it and do it towards something. What are you trying to learn about? What are you trying to learn? That's how you do it.
If you've got a long list of books to read, just start with the one that you want now. You could start with the Daily Stoic, of course, as well. So definitely take a look at that if you're enjoying our conversation here today, talking about Stoicism and all of these great ideas, insights, and wisdom. Ryan, it's been phenomenal talking to you. I've actually really enjoyed it. We could go on and on and on. But definitely wanted to ask you if there's anything you feel that we haven't quite touched on, anything you really want to share.
The Stoics are saying that philosophy is school for life, right? That this is how you learn how to be better. This is how you become the best version of yourself. And so I guess to what we were just talking about, seeing reading as part of that journey, right? Readers are leaders and leaders are readers is something I heard a baseball coach say a couple weeks ago, and I really like that. So it's you're pushing yourself to be better, and in pushing yourself to be better, you're making other people better, and you're sort of sharing in this sort of exchange of wisdom. That's what motivates me to pick up books every day.
Yeah, completely. And one last question from myself, because I'm really excited by a society or community where change makers are all friends. Mm-hmm. Were Stoics at the same time friends with each other, or were they enemies?
What's interesting, so Epictetus is this slave, and Marcus Aurelius reads Epictetus, and he hears about Epictetus from one of his students. So the idea that this low member of society is somehow influencing the highest member of that same society, to me, is just this amazing sort of quirk of history. And so yes, I do think that there they're quoting each other and they're learning from each other and they're pushing each other. And the point of Stoicism was to ask tough questions and then struggle to find an answer. Nice. And so, yeah, I don't know if they were hanging out having beer together, but they were pushing each other to be better.
Yeah, no, and I think that just gives a lot of faith for people who are learning, growing, and evolving when they see that, wow, all these change makers and all these individuals who have great ideas are actually collaborating to help us rather than having their own followings or their own, which what modern day social media or modern day guruism kind of promotes.
Well, and I'll give you a line then from Seneca that connects to that. He's saying, look, you can't choose who your parents are, but you can choose whose children you want to be. Mm-hmm. So you can choose to follow in this tradition, even though they're dead and you'll never meet them. Mm. You can let them be your intellectual forefathers, and I love that concept.
Yeah. If you've enjoyed our discussion today, we've dropped the links to the Daily Stoic and Ego is the Enemy by Ryan Holiday in the comments section if you really like that. Thank you so much for joining in to this segment of Follow the Reader, and these were the books that we were recommending today and that we were looking at. I hope that you follow him on Instagram and Twitter as well, and we look forward to seeing you again. I look forward to serving you again next week, and thank you so much, Ryan.
Thanks for having me. It was awesome.
Thank you so much. Take care, guys.